So tetralogy of Fallot, mainly they will ask us what are the components of tetralogy of Fallot, which obviously all will be knowing. That is a large, non-restrictive, mal-aligned ventricular septal defect, then overriding of the aorta, right ventricular outflow tract obstruction, and right ventricular hypertrophy. These are the four essential components of tetralogy of Fallot. So this is for classical tetralogy of Fallot. Then here we can show, here is the figure showing the normal heart, and here is the tetralogy of Fallot, where there is mal-aligned ventricular septal defect. Then there is a deviation of the interventricular septum, that is anterocephalar deviation, which I am going to discuss later. Then there is right ventricular hypertrophy, and there is RVOT obstruction. Then what are the variants of TOF? When this particular question is asked, we are supposed to tell only these two, that is pulmonary atresia with ventricular septal defect and TOF with absent pulmonary valve. Some people have the tendency to tell this Hoffman variant that is not described as a variant of TOF in Moss and Adams or in Perloff, so better not to tell. If somebody specifically asks, then we can tell. Then each one of them we'll discuss later. Then coming on to epidemiology.
AV canal?
That is a variant, that is under TOF physiology.
Okay,
see, variant of TOF is different. TOF physiology is different.
No, Gautam, TET canal they told not to present as TOF. This discussion had come up. JR sir doesn't want it being presented as a TOF.
Yeah, even some people refuse it for TOF physiology also, I think. Okay. Then coming on to epidemiology, it is a commonest cyanotic congenital heart disease. The incidence is between 0.26 to 0.48 per 1,000 live births. Equal distribution in both the sexes. Sibling recurrence rate is about 2.5 to 3% if one sibling is affected. And if more number of siblings is affected, the further risk increases. Coming on to few historical aspects, this you can read. That is Niels Stinson was the one who first described it, and John Kirkland was the one who did the first successful complete repair. And our BTT shunt was first described by Blalock, Thomas, and Towsing in 1945. And Fallot described the exact anatomy of tetralogy of Fallot in 1888 itself. Coming on to etiopathogenesis. So both genetic and environmental factors play an important role. Among genetic factors, it can be either due to single gene mutation, such as NKX2.5 or JAG1 gene mutation as seen in Alagille syndrome, Holt-Oram syndrome, or it can be due to, these constitute about 10 to 20%, or it can be due to chromosomal anomalies, as in the case of DiGeorge syndrome, velocardiofacial insufficiency, also called as velocardiofacial insufficiency, or 22 chrome long arm first region, first band, and second subband. That will be the site of abnormality. This is the chromosome, this we need to remember. And another thing is Down syndrome, Alagille syndrome. It can also occur in association with trisomy 18 and trisomy 13. So they may ask what is syndromic TOF? The TOF that occur in association with these syndromes is called as syndromic TOF. Then coming on to environmental factors, maternal diabetes is associated with threefold increased risk. Then maternal diabetes is associated with threefold increased risk. Then retinoic acid, then maternal phenylketonuria and trimethadone exposure is associated with increased chance of having tetralogy of Fallot. Coming on to embryological basis, as described by Van Parag, he described tetralogy of Fallot as a monology of Fallot. That is, all the components of tetralogy of Fallot basically results from anterocephalar deviation of the infundibular septum, also called as conal septum, also called as outlet septum. These three words meant the same in relation to trabecular septum, from which all four features of TOF can be explained. So the anterocephalar deviation, I repeat, anterocephalar deviation of the infundibular septum or the conal septum is responsible for all the four typical features of tetralogy of Fallot. Okay, so because of this, all the four components results, and TOF is considered to be the most differentiated form of conotruncal anomaly. The most undifferentiated form of conotruncal anomaly is truncus arteriosus, that develops early in the pathogenesis, early in the embryogenesis, and TOF develops late in embryogenesis. Coming on to pathoanatomical features. So coming on to RVOT obstruction. So why RVOT obstruction results? It results from two components. One is because of deviated outlet septum, that is anterocephalar deviation of the conal septum, and secondly because of the hypertrophied septoparietal trabeculations, which encircles the subpulmonary outflow tract. In addition to subpulmonary obstruction, there will also be valvular and supravalvular obstruction. So the obstruction can be both subvalvular, can be at the level of subvalvular, valvular, and supravalvular level. All these three togetherly constitutes the obstruction, and the final outcome is depend upon the impedance of all these three things. The pulmonary valve is commonly small and stenotic. The pulmonary valve is either bicuspid or unicuspid. Most of the time it is bicuspid. In Satyanarayana Rao et al. Series, about 59 specimens of TOF were studied, and it was found that out of 59, bicuspid pulmonary valve was found in 32 cases, tricuspid in 10, and unicuspid in 8. In another study by Binita R. et al. From CMC Vellore, they studied some 30 patients, out of which bicuspid aortic valve was found in 16% of the patients. So most of the time it is bicuspid aortic valve rather than tricuspid in tetralogy of Fallot. So coming on to the branch pulmonary artery. Pulmonary, I'm telling, no? Pulmonary valve. So bicuspid pulmonary valve is most common in tetralogy of Fallot in relation to pulmonary valve. So branch pulmonary artery obstruction can happen both proximally as well as distally. So pulmonary atresia with a non-restrictive ventricular septal defect is the ultimate expression of severity of tetralogy of Fallot. That is the most severe form of tetralogy of Fallot is TOF with pulmonary atresia. In this Green Lane Hospital series conducted from 1986 to 1978, isolated infundibular stenosis was found in 26%. Then infundibular plus valvular stenosis was found in 26%, almost equal to infundibular stenosis. Then the other things like infundibular plus valvular plus supravalvular stenosis was found in 16%. Then diffuse RVOT hypoplasia in 27%, and dominant valvular stenosis in 5%. Coming on to abnormalities of the pulmonary artery and its branches. So there was LPA and RPA origin stenosis in 5.8%, this being the most common, followed by LPA origin stenosis in 2.7%, RPA origin stenosis in 0.3%. So LPA origin stenosis is more common. Even absent LPA, if at all it happens, if at all there is absence of one of the pulmonary artery, then also that is more commonly left pulmonary artery. Here that is given here 4%, and LPA origin stenosis is also 2.7%. So that's about the anatomy of the right ventricular outflow tract obstruction. Then coming on to the second component of tetralogy of Fallot, ventricular septal defect. So the classically it is described as malaligned non-restrictive subaortic VSD or conotruncal VSD. Okay, so this non-restrictive malaligned subaortic VSD will have an infundibular extension. The crest of the muscular trabecular septum forms the floor of the defect, which is roofed by the overriding aorta. So the VSD will be roofed by overriding aorta. Rarely VSD can occur as a part of AV canal defect, then it becomes TET canal defect. Sometimes there can be additional muscular VSDs. Some minority of the patients with tetralogy of Fallot may have restrictive VSD, which is called as Hoffman variant. In them, the cause of restriction are two. One is either the attachment of the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve to the crest of the interventricular septum, or because of the hypertrophy of the muscles at the margin of the ventricular septal defect. Then coming on to the next component of tetralogy of Fallot, that is aorta or overriding of the aorta. So there is varying degree of overriding, that is 15 to 95%. So usually we tell more than 50% overriding, then it goes in favor of DORV. But along with that, there should be aortomitral discontinuity to call it as a DORV. So we have to more rely on aortomitral discontinuity rather than amount of overriding of the aorta, because even in TOF there can be more than 50% overriding. And coming on to determined chiefly by the degree of malalignment of the outlet septum. Then coming on to RV hypertrophy, I will commonly Prabhati madam asked the question, what is the reason for RV hypertrophy? So it is because of the failure of regression of intrauterine RV dominance, because RV is exposed to systemic circulation, high pressure systemic circulation. In the intrauterine life, RV will be carrying out carrying out the entire circulation. Similarly, post birth, it will be exposed to high pressure systemic circulation because of non-restrictive VST, and that's why the intrauterine RV dominance continues. That's why RV hypertrophy remains. We should not tell that as it is because of pulmonary stenosis, because pulmonary stenosis or the infundibulous stenosis will not cause RV hypertrophy because there will be large non-restrictive VST. Then coming on to coronaries. Coming on to what are the coronary anomalies that are common in these patients. So it is seen in 5 to 7% of the patients. LAD or accessory LAD originating from RCA or from the right coronary sinus and crossing the RVOT is a common anomaly seen in about 4% of the patients. A single coronary artery originating from left coronary sinus is seen in about 1% of the patients. And abnormally prominent, this one, what is it? Abnormally prominent coronal artery. That is also one more anomaly seen in this patient. This can't be called as anomaly, and coronal artery can be unduly prominent. That one we need to remember. And one more thing. So if somebody asks the incidence of various of these anomalies, this is from Vijay Lakshmi Madam book, which we can't quote in exams. I didn't get a proper reference. Just I put this, you just to remember. Single coronary ostium 4.2%, LAD arising from RCA or right coronary sinus, this constitute about 4.2%. Then LCX arising from RCA about 0.8%, and large conus is quite common, find in 9.3% of the patients. So you have to remember three things importantly: large conus 9.3%, single coronary artery, and LAD originating from RCA or right coronary sinus and crossing the RVOT. So main thing is whether it crosses the RVOT, that is most important. Here we can see various anomalies. This is the normal with a small coronal artery. This is large coronal artery. Here is the LAD originating from RCA. Here there is dual LAD, one LAD coming from left coronary sinus and another LAD coming from RCA. Here there is single here there is LAD originating from RCA. Here there is LAD and RCA coming from LAD coming from, sorry, RCA coming from LAD. Then coming on to RV hypertrophy, this I have already told, it is because of continuation of intrauterine dominance. Then coming on to aortic arch, there can be right-sided aortic arch in 20 to 25% of the cases, and as the severity of infundibular obstruction increases, the chances of having right-sided aorta increases, and in the ultimate form of tetralogy of Fallot, that is stop with pulmonary atresia, it is 50%. Coming on to pulmonary arteries, and whenever there is right-sided aortic arch, there is also increased incidence of having absent pulmonary artery, usually on the side contralateral to that of aortic arch. That is, if there is right-sided aortic arch, there can be absent left pulmonary artery, which is this is different from that in truncus arteriosus, where pulmonary absents are usually absent on same side of the aortic arch. Coming on to pulmonary arteries, there can be abnormalities of branch PA more often associated with severity of, if there is severe outflow tract obstruction, then there are more chances of having branch pulmonary artery stenosis. Central pulmonary arteries may be confluent or non-confluent. Central pulmonary arteries are confluent in 2/3 of the cases, okay, and supply portion of both the lungs and along with the collaterals. Sometimes there can be both blood supply in top with sometimes it can be supply from both pulmonary arteries as well as from collaterals. So most commonly the pulmonary pulmonary valve and proximal part of the pulmonary trunk are hypoplastic. In top with pulmonary atresia, 100% of the blood supply will be derived from systemic circulation, whereas in tetralogy it is used depending upon the severity. It can be either derived from the lungs, either derived from pulmonary artery alone, in which case there won't be any collaterals. If there are too much of collaterals, then it results, if there is pulmonary atresia, then 100% of the blood flow will be from collaterals. Coming on to the systemic aortopulmonary collaterals. So collateral arteries when present arises from the descending aorta most commonly. Less commonly it arises from the subclavian artery, rarely from the abdominal aorta and coronary arteries. There are these collateral arteries vary in size from 1 to 20 mm, and they may vary in number from 1 to 6. Coming on to Rabinovich classification, this one they commonly ask who will give the classification. That is Rabinovich who gave the classification. That is type 1 is bronchial artery collaterals, which originates from the bronchial artery and anastomosis to the pulmonary artery within the lung. These do not produce the murmurs. These are the only type of collaterals which are seen in classical tetralogy of Fallot, and they are not going to produce murmurs. So direct collaterals and indirect collaterals are seen only in the case of TOF with pulmonary atresia, and these collaterals are going to produce the murmurs. So direct collaterals are the one which arises directly from the descending aorta and anastomosis with the pulmonary artery at the hilum of the lung. And indirect collaterals are the one which originate from the aortic branches like subclavian artery, brachiocephalic artery, and branches other than bronchial artery. They originate and anastomosis with the proximal part of the pulmonary artery outside the lung. So this is the image showing tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia, where we can see that there is no flow from right ventricular outflow tract. The pulmonary arteries are hypoplastic. So entire lung is supplied by systemic circulation from aorta through various collaterals. All three major types of systemic artery collaterals are present in TOF with pulmonary atresia, but only bronchial collaterals are produced in classical TOF. And these bronchial collaterals do not produce murmurs as they are very internal, and these direct and indirect collaterals, if they are superficial, are going to produce the murmurs. For example, if they are originating from the subclavian artery, we can hear a murmur in infraclavicular area. And commonly, also we hear the murmur over the back. In 40%, anastomosis occur with MPA, LPA, or RPA. In remaining 60%, collaterals enter the hilum, travel along the bronchi as pulmonary arteries, and supply variable number of bronchopulmonary segments. Sorry, it is bronchopulmonary segments. Then collaterals are considered to be more stable source of blood supply compared to PDA. So in TOF with pulmonary atresia, there can be two sources of blood supply, either from PDA or from collaterals. So these collaterals are considered to be the stable source of blood supply compared to PDA because they are multiple in number. That is the main reason. And stenosis occur in 60% of these collaterals as the age advances. Some of these stenosis can be congenital and it can be acquired. If it is acquired or congenital, it progresses as the child grows and eventually may become inadequate. So once the stenosis develops, the continuous murmur produced by these collaterals disappears. That's why they tell in adult patient with the TOF with pulmonary atresia, sometimes we may not get a continuous murmur over the back because of this stenosis. So stenosis may some bronchopulmonary segments may be hypoperfused and some may be hyperperfused, resulting in variable histopathological changes. Where they are hyperperfused, there can be features of pulmonary arterial hypertension and obliterative changes. Okay, then coming on to patent ductus arteriosus. Hello.
Hello, Arun.
Ah.
What definition for revision sake? What is the definition of this MAPCAs? MAPCA.
Definition of
MAPCAs, major aortopulmonary collaterals.
Those are the collaterals arising from aorta or its branches to the supply the lung, either directly or through the anastomosing with the pulmonary artery.
The size of the collateral should be 3 mm, and if you occlude that collateral, at least there should be some 10% drop in saturation. That's what they that criteria to meet the definition of MAPCA.
And anything related to them, some lobules or lobes of the lungs?
No, I'm not sure. Anything like that is there?
Something is there.
The two conditions I don't know. It should be minimum of 3 mm size, and if you occlude that, there should be some 10% drop in saturation. That's what I heard during discussion.
Okay, I'll check that and add. Okay. Then coming on to, I got this direct, indirect, and bronchopulmonary collaterals. One more, what is exactly meant by major aortopulmonary collaterals? I have to search. I have to find out for that. Okay. Then coming on to patent ductal arteriosus is another source of blood supply. Approximately 6% of the patients have PDA. When present, it is usually unilateral and associated with confluent branch PAs in 80% of the patients. pulmonary arteries are of relatively, if at all there is PDA, the pulmonary arteries are usually of good size. Then coming on to ductus, and sometimes there can be blood flow both from the ductus as well as from the systemic artery collaterals. They coexist, but only rarely they supply the same lung. That is, if both are present, one PDA will be supplying one this thing, and the major aortopulmonary collaterals will be supplying another lung. PDA is a precarious source of blood supply because it tends to close as age advances, and 50% of the cases PDA get occluded. Hence, we need to do, if at all we want to rely on PDA itself as a source of blood supply, we need to do PDA stenting. Then coming on to tetralogy of Allet with pulmonary atresia, with pulmonary atresia, here the pulmonary valve will be imperforate. In approximately half of the patients, the right and left pulmonary arteries are confluent with blood supply, but there won't be any continuity between the right ventricular outflow tract and the main pulmonary artery. And the blood to the pulmonary arteries will be entirely derived from either the ductus or from the or from the aortopulmonary collaterals. In other half, the pulmonary blood flow will be multifocal, that is from the aortopulmonary collaterals. Coming on to tetralogy of Allet with absent pulmonary valve, it constitutes 3 to 6% of the patient with TOF. Some people consider that TOF with absent pulmonary valve is not actually TOF. Its exact pathogenesis is different because it occurs because of the persistent absence of the ductus arteriosus. So, all 100% of the case with TOF with pulmonary absent pulmonary valve will have ductus arteriosus is always absent in them, and probably it has been implicated in its pathogenesis. This we need to remember. Then here, what happens to the pulmonary valve? They are totally absent, or only a rudimentary ridge of ridge of tissue remains at the pulmonary valve. As a result, the pulmonary arteries are dilated and may be aneurysmal, which can be well appreciated in the chest X-ray. The pulmonary blood flow will also be relatively preserved. There will be cardiomegaly. RVOT obstruction is due to the ring of tissue at the level of valve, that is at the level of heart, and not due to infundibular stenosis. So here there won't be any infundibular stenosis, rather because of some ring of rudimentary tissue at the level of valve, the patient will have mild RVOT obstruction. Since RVOT obstruction is less severe, as pulmonary vascular resistance falls, there can be a feature of increased pulmonary blood flow. Child may go for failure, 50 of and may present with signs of heart failure. Then 50% of them may have right-sided aortic arch, which in turn may be associated with absent pulmonary artery. Then ductus arteriosus is always absent in them. This I have already told. Then coming on to clinical features of this TOF with absent pulmonary valve, most common way of presentation is either with failure, or more common than it is with the airway obstruction and respiratory problems, which can present at birth because of dilated pulmonary artery compressing the trachea and bronchi and causing a respiratory compromise. And single second heart sound will be present, and that will be A2, and there will be free PR causing to and fro murmur, also called as sawing wood murmur. In the ear, there is a chest X-ray of TOF with the absent pulmonary valve. Both right and left pulmonary arteries are usually dilated. Then MRI and CT can be done in order, which gives additional information, and treatment involves in severe affected infants. Some improvement may be seen in prone position, in which the pulmonary artery falls forwards and reduces the compression over the brachial artery. Then prompt intubation and positive pressure ventilation may be needed. The surgical strategies to treat these patients include TOF repair along with the plication and reduction of the pulmonary arteries. So we have to plicate the pulmonary artery and reduce its size, or we can do a variation of Lee-Campis maneuver, in which the aorta is also transected, the right pulmonary artery is brought anterior, and then the anastomosis is done, and by doing this, the compression over the brachial artery will be reduced. And they have to put a RV to PA conduit. Then even after complete repair, recurrent respiratory tract infection can happen, plus or minus RV to pulmonary artery conduit. If at all the pulmonary valve is well open, they need not have to put well open. Here they have to put RV to PA valved pulmonary artery conduit. That is, I meant to say, they something like homograph conduit. They have to pulmonary valve replacement they have to do, because pulmonary valve will be absent in this case. Then even after complete surgical repair, recurrent respiratory tract infections can happen, and as the child grows, wheezing, reactive airway disease can happen. and there may be need for re-intervention. Then tetralogy of Fallot with double outlet right ventricle. This is this comes under top physiology. More than 50% of the aorta override will be there. There will be aortomitral discontinuity. So both aorta and pulmonary artery will be mainly committed to the right ventricle. The physiological presentation is almost similar to that of TOF. There are important implications for surgical repair because patients with the aorta originating predominantly from the right ventricle are at a greatest risk of obstruction of the newly created left ventricular outward clot because of long patch. Here they have to use long patch for establishing left ventricle to aorta continuity. So at that time, this can result in stenosis and subaortic stenosis in the later post-surgical period. Then coming on to tetralogy of Fallot with absent pulmonary valve. So here it constitutes 2% of the patient. It is also called as Tet-Canol defect. This combination can commonly occur in the children with Down syndrome. It is a surgical challenge. AV canal defect itself is a surgical challenge. Along with that, if there is tetralogy of Fallot, it will further complicate the surgery. Then presentation is more like isolated TOF rather than isolated AV canal defect. These patients have restriction in their pulmonary blood flow, unlike in the case of classical AV canal defect. Hence, can be operated late compared to those with isolated AV canal defect. And the classical TOF case will have right axis deviation, whereas in the tetralogy of AV canal defect, there will be left axis deviation. And there can be RV or LV dominance depending upon the dominant ventricle, balanced and unbalanced ventricles. Then coming on to tetralogy of Fallot with hemitruncus. Here, one of the origin of one pulmonary artery will be from the right ventricle, and the other pulmonary artery will be originating from the ascending aorta. It is most often it is a left pulmonary artery that is originating from the ascending aorta. So since left pulmonary artery is originating from ascending aorta, there will be increased pulmonary blood flow to left lung, resulting in left lung pulmonary hypertension and hypoperfusion to the right lung. So one lung will be hypoperfused, other lung will be hypoperfused. Occasionally, there may be apparent complete absence of left pulmonary artery in the setting of TOF. Such cases should be investigated for possible origin of a left pulmonary artery from left-sided ductus arteriosus, which commonly arises from the base of the left brachiocephalic or subclavian artery. This is of rare occurrence. This is mainly important if at all there is a left-sided ductus from which this commonly arising, there is a commonly arising from base of left brachiocephalic or subclavian artery. It can be considered for probing and stenting and rehabilitating. That is, however, a rare situation. Then coming on to other associated cardiac anomalies in tetralogy of Fallot, we have atrial septal defect, which can occur in 9%. When along with the 4 components of tetralogy of Fallot, if ASD occurs, then it becomes pentalogy of Fallot. Then there can be persistent LSVC found in 8% of the cases. Then aberrant right subclavian artery usually seen in 0.3% of the cases. Then absent right SVC 0.2%. Congenital heart block and vascular rings can happen in few cases. Then all cases of aberrant right subclavian artery do not cause vascular ring. They do not cause compressive symptoms. Only few cases will cause compressive symptoms that we need to remember. Then coming on to hemodynamics. So tetralogy of Fallot is characterized by non-restrictive VSD, as a result of which the right ventricular blood pressure will be the right ventricular pressure will be equal to LV pressure will be equal to aortic pressure. The pulmonary artery pressure will be either normal or it will be lower, about 15 to 20 millimeters of mercury. But the pulmonary vascular resistance in the distal pulmonary arterial bed is usually normal. Coming on to pathology, the pathophysiological consequence of Fallot's tetralogy depends upon 2 important variables. So directors are used to ask this question: what are the determinants of pulmonary blood flow in tetralogy of Fallot? So the answer should be the degree of obstruction of right ventricular flow obstruction, which determines the total impedance of the total impedance at subvalvular, valvular, and supravalvular level, and systemic vascular resistance. In simple words, to tell, it depends upon balance between pulmonary balance between right ventricular outflow tract impedance and systemic vascular resistance. The magnitude and direction of the shunt are determined by the difference in the impedance between the unobstructed but relatively high pressure systemic vascular resistance and obstructed pulmonary outflow tract and vascular bed. Obstructed pulmonary obstructed pulmonary outflow tract. Okay, the balance between the systemic circulation and the pulmonary circulation determines the direction of shunt. So, because of fixed RVOT obstruction, changes in cyanosis often represents change in systemic vascular resistance. So, the most important determinant is systemic vascular resistance that determines the saturation of the blood and the pulmonary blood flow, and hence the saturation of blood. Then coming on to during exercise, what happens? There will be drop in systemic vascular resistance. The decrease in SVR is with the fixed impedance at the pulmonary artery flow will result in augmented degree of right to left ventricular level shunting. However, another school of thought is that even the RVOT impedance is not fixed; it is variable, and during the cyanotic spells they can have instant ventricular spasm, thereby increasing right to left shunt. That school of thought is also there. Then coming on to RV function, the right ventricular function is good in tetralogy of Fallot, hence they will not have RV failure. This is because of non-restrictive VST through which it can easily decompress into LV. Heart failure usually does not occur in TOF except in following situations. That is pulmonary atresia with large systemic arterial collaterals, so that there is relatively increased pulmonary blood flow, which in turn can lead to heart failure. Then mainly left ventricular failure. Then accessory tricuspid leaflet tissue that partially occludes ventricular septal defect, resulting in Hoffman variant, causing suprasystemic RV pressure and causing its failure. Then absence of pulmonary valve, that is TOF with absent pulmonary artery, which can cause volume overload of the pressure overload. It's wrong. Both the pressure overload and volume overload, mainly volume overload of the RV, as a result of which it may fail. Then systemic hypertension, when they become adults, it can they may develop systemic hypertension, and that can lead to biventricular failure. Then acquired calcific aortic stenosis, as aorta is overridden by overriding both the ventricles, overriding the septum. Acquired aortic stenosis and aortic regurgitation both can lead to biventricular failure. Then infective endocarditis of the incompetent aortic valve can result in biventricular failure. So in all these conditions, the JVP can be elevated. So what are the causes for elevated JVP? If they ask, how to tell all these: Hoffman variant, absent TOF with absent pulmonary valve, systemic hypertension, then acquired if they develop aortic stenosis and aortic regurgitation and infective endocarditis. Then anemia, and anemia is one more cause to be mentioned. Then coming on to clinical features, the initial presentation of tetralogy of Fallot varies depending upon the severity of obstruction of the blood flow to the lungs. So the initial presentation of tetralogy of Fallot varies depending upon severity of the blood flow to the lungs. The newborns and infants usually present with either cyanosis and systolic murmur. So usually cyanosis does not present at birth. This is because of following reasons. That is, oxygen requirement will be lesser at birth because of lesser physical activity. Then secondly, fetal hemoglobin will be present. Because of these two factors, and PDA will be open. Because of these three factors, PDA may not cause cyanosis. TOF may not cause cyanosis at birth, but later it appears as there is increase in the oxygen requirement with the growing child, and the progressive RVOT obstruction and closure of the PDA and decrease in fetal hemoglobin as the newborn as the age advances. Lead to presentation of TOF with cyanosis at about 2 to 3 months of age. In infants with severe degree of right ventricular outflow tract obstruction and pulmonary atresia, however, neonatal cyanosis can be noted. In these neonates, pulmonary blood flow will be dependent on flow through the ductus arteriosus. If there is severe RVOT obstruction, then there will be a severe ductus dependent condition, as in the case of TOF with pulmonary atresia. When the ductus begins to close in the first few hours of life, or severe cyanosis and circulatory collapse can happen. These patients need to be managed intensively, either by palliative surgery or by PDA stenting. Few infants with TOF with pulmonary atresia may not have cyanosis due to adequate blood flow through PDA and MAPCAS or both. However, few of them may present with failure at 4 to 6 weeks when PVR falls and pulmonary blood flow increases. So even in TOF with pulmonary atresia, it is not that all will present with severe cyanosis. Few of them, if at all they have adequate pulmonary blood flow occurring either through the PDA or through the MAPCAS, then they may have relatively less cyanosis and they may be doing well until the PDA close or MAPCAS become inadequate. Then coming on to dyspnea. So what is the mechanism of dyspnea in tetralogy of Fallot? So it is because of following theories have been proposed. One is because of hypoxia of the respiratory muscles, which causes the respiratory muscle fatigue, ventilation perfusion mismatch, and third one because of hypoxemic hypercarbic blood with low pH stimulating the carotid chemoreceptors and respiratory center in the brain. These three mechanisms is responsible for dyspnea in tetralogy of Fallot. However, there are some more mechanisms which explain dyspnea in right heart failure that is different. So I will not include the other causes. Then coming on to effort intolerance, that is also a common feature in tetralogy of Fallot. Then they can have headache and blurring of vision because of hyperviscosity syndrome. So TOF with pulmonary atresia, the 1 year survival is about 50%. And 10 years, TOF with pulmonary atresia, the 1 year survival is about 50%, and 10 year survival is 8%. TOF with absent pulmonary valve, only 25%. This has worse prognosis among these two, among these TOF, that is only 25% survival at 1 year. Natural history of the TOF I will discuss later. Then coming on to cyanotic spell, hypercyanotic spell, or the hypoxic spell, or the TED spell. So the definition of a cyanotic spell they commonly ask, it is the paroxysm of progressive increase in rate and depth of respiration that culminates in paroxysmal deepening cyanosis, limpiness, syncope, and occasionally in convulsions, cerebrovascular events, and rarely death. This is from Perloff. Okay, the paroxysm of progressive increase in the rate and depth of respiration, culminating in deepening cyanosis, limpiness, syncope, and occasionally in convulsions, cerebrovascular events, and rarely death. Some people oppose this word syncope, but it is mentioned in Perloff, so we can write it. Then coming on to peak incidence is between 2nd and 6th month of life, and however it can continue up to 2 years, and it is rare after 2 years of age. Spells are typically initiated by stress such as feeding, crying, or bowel movements, because these factors will increase the heart rate, increase the cardiac output, particularly when the infant awakens from the deep sleep, at which point the respiratory center will be more vulnerable. Various mechanisms are involved in the pathogenesis of the Fallot's spells, TED spells. So that is acceleration of the heart rate, causing acceleration of the heart rate caused with either in the form of SVT or rapid atrial pacing is found to decrease the preload. As a result, it will increase the infundibular narrowing, and as a result, it causes increase in right to left shunt. So whenever there is acceleration or increase in the heart rate, the RV filling will be reduced because of reduced duration of the diastole. This underfilled RV will predispose to narrowing of the infundibulum. Since the infundibulum get narrowed, there will be increase in right to left shunt. This is called as Young and Stack et al. Theory. Then coming on to acute change in inotropy, which occurs because of endogenous catecholamine release in response to pain. Increase in the cardiac output and venous return, which occurs due to various triggering factors like feeding, crying, or bowel movements. Increased systemic oxygen consumption, causing fall in mean venous oxygen saturation. Example, secondary to pain or anxiety. And increase in the right to left shunt due to decrease in SVR, like fever, hot bath. All these factors will lead to systemic vasodilatation, causing decrease in the SVR and thereby predisposing to right to left shunt. Then vulnerable respiratory center theory, which was given by Gunroth and Morgan et al. Theory. So which are in infants, there will be respiratory center will be highly vulnerable and sensitive after prolonged deep sleep, which react to sudden increase in the cardiac output provoked by feeding, crying, straining, and initiates the vicious cycle. So this is the most likely trigger for cyanotic spell, and the infundibular spasm per se may not lead directly cause cyanotic spell. Rather, it may helps in reinforcing. It may only reinforce rather than initiation of cyanotic spell. So initially, Paulud told that this was the first theory to be put forth, that infundibular spasm is what is responsible for cyanotic spell. But later, it was found that cyanotic spell can happen even in top with pulmonary atresia. So that's why they attributed in the presence of pulmonary atresia, there won't be any alteration in pulmonary blood flow. Pulmonary blood flow from RVO2 will be absolutely nil. Even then, they are having cyanotic spell. So probably it is due to alteration in the systemic vascular resistance, and that's why they disagreed with the infundibular spasm theory, and they told it probably reinforces rather than initiating cyanotic spell. Then another important theory is stimulation of the mechanoreceptors present in the right ventricle, because RV pressure will be high. As a result, the mechanoreceptors in the RV get stimulated, which in turn causes peripheral vasodilatation. This was proposed by Dr. Shamsundar Kothari from AIIMS, and that is called Kothari's theory. This is the cycle taken from Perloff. The stress of feeding, crying, and bowel movements, particularly often after when the infant awakes from sleep, this will cause acute increase in systemic vascular resistance, increase in the heart rate, decrease in the venous return. That decrease in the venous return itself will have some amount of infundibular narrowing. Along with that, infundibular contraction also contribute to it. Increase in these two factors togetherly leads to increase in right to left shunt across the VSD. So the saturation of blood in the arterial blood on systemic circulation, it falls. CO2 increases and pH falls, which in turn will stimulate which causes increase in the rate and depth of respiration because of stimulation of the carotid baroreceptors and respiratory center. And vulnerable respiratory center mechanism will also contribute to it. Then increased negative intrathoracic pressure, there will be increase in the venous return to the right side of the heart. This in turn will again increases the right to left shunt. This is the vicious cycle. Then coming on to complications of cyanotic spell. Recurrent cyanotic spell can lead to brain damage and mental retardation. So this is one of the complications. Secondly, they can have cortical venous thrombosis, and small occult thrombi may become manifest during this cyanotic spell. And thirdly, because the cyanotic spells are commonly associated with dehydration, that is also one more predisposing factor for the cyanotic spells. During those episodes, they can have cortical vein thrombosis and occult thrombosis predisposed to these thrombotic complications. Then velopharyngeal insufficiency, this is because of prolonged hypoxic damage to the brain, causing nasal speech, hypernasal speech. Then they can have seizures and rarely death. Then coming on to squatting. Squatting is the adaptive mechanism that is developed by the child in order to overcome the cyanotic spell. It is considered to be the classical hallmark of classical tetralogy of Fallot. The mechanism by which squatting exerts is its beneficial effect are as follows. So squatting increases the systemic vascular resistance. So during cyanotic spell, SVR decreases. Squatting increases the systemic vascular resistance and diverts the right ventricular blood into pulmonary circulation. So here comes the role of the impedance between the pulmonary right ventricular outflow tract obstruction and systemic vascular resistance. Here, since the systemic vascular resistance increases, there will be increase in the pulmonary blood flow, and hence the saturation, there will be better oxygenation of the blood, and hence the systemic saturation improves. Then squatting counteracts the orthostatic hypotension and diminishes or prevents the exertion associated orthostatic faintness. This mechanism is mainly given in Perloff. I think you can skip this also, because what he has given is after prolonged exercise, if somebody remains in a standing position, there are a high chance of having orthostatic hypotension. Rather that if they assume the squatting position, it will increase the venous return. It helps in preventing orthostatic hypotension. That's what it is given. I think this mechanism, even if we don't mention, it's okay. Then squatting mechanically curtails the lower extremity venous return. This is more important. That is, it compresses both the femoral artery and femoral vein. As a result, it decreases the return of unsaturated venous blood from the lower extremity to the heart and increases the oxygen saturation of the right ventricular blood. So since less amount of desaturated blood comes from lower extremity, so the saturation of blood in the RV will relatively increase. Along with that, whenever a child squats, there will be compression of the abdomen also. So there will be increase in the abdominal splanchnic venous return, which is relatively oxygenated blood. So increased amount of oxygenated blood coming from the splanchnic circulation and decrease in the deoxygenated blood coming from the lungs results in increased right ventricular saturation is one more mechanism that is proposed for mechanism of how squatting helps in overcoming cyanotic spell. Then right ventricular blood shunting into the systemic circulation will have higher oxygen saturation pH, as well as a result of this the triggering of the respiratory center and chemoreceptors are stopped, and hence the squatting episodes terminates. Sorry, and hence the cyanotic spell terminates. The higher PO2 and pH and the lower PCO2 reduces the stimulation of the respiratory center, carotid body, and hence the episode stops. Then they ask the common question, what are squatting equivalents? This is also well given in Pavlov. That is so the typical squatting, then sitting with the legs crossed underneath, then standing in the legs crossed, standing with the legs crossed while legs crossed. However, this found to be a less efficient mechanism. Then infant held by with the leg flexed over the abdomen and lying down, commonly in the prone position or with the leg fold position. These are considered to be the squatting equivalents which has been described. Then coming on to physical examination findings. Hello?
Yeah, continue.
Okay, anything need to be told?
How will RV saturation be high in squatting?
Because of decreased
relatively
high. Because less
because
amount
the
of
most
desaturated
desaturated blood from the exercising muscles of the lower limb will be cut off from reaching the RV, and the more saturated, like comparatively more saturated venous blood in the stomach from the splanchnic circulation will reach the RV. So once that more desaturated blood is stopped from reaching the RV, and that is getting and the more saturated blood is getting shunted to the LV, such that in whatever is in circulation, that is more saturated relatively.
Okay.
Relatively more saturated blood. Okay. That's about cyanotic spell. Treatment we'll discuss later.
Regarding these timings, till what time this cyanotic spells can happen, after what time this squatting will not be seen, something is there. No?
Cyanotic spell is common between up to 6 months, no, and the squatting is from seen up to 2 years, and afterwards squatting is rare. I have written that. Peak incidence of cyanotic spell is between 2 months to 6 months, with an occasional spell as early as first year, and they're rare after 2 years of age. Cyanotic spells, and these squatting spells, once the child starts matures, it starts to adopt other mechanisms. Like it starts from about once the child is able to squat, that is from about 1 year of age, and after about 2 to 3 years of age, it terminates. So, but sometimes even the adults also squat. It depends on their adoptive mechanism, what they adopt. Then complications I told. Then physical examination findings. Cyanosis will be of varying intensity. Clubbing of the nail bed may be seen. It will be pan-digital clubbing and long-standing cases. Then coming on to cardiovascular system examination, the arterial pulse will be usually normal, except in few cases where there can be collapsing pulse. If at all we get a collapsing pulse in tetralogy of Fallot, what are the causes? So it can be either due to PDA, aortopulmonary collaterals, because of functioning BT or other form of palliative shunts, or because of aortic regurgitation. These are the 4 causes which we are supposed to mention. Then coming on to JVP, it will be usually normal. However, if it is elevated, what are the causes? Again, the aortopulmonary collaterals, or if they develop biventricular failure either due to AA or AS, systemic hypertension, anemia, then infective endocarditis, or if there is a restrictive VSD, as in Hoffman variant, then they can have elevation in the JVP. And coming in the post-TOF repair patient, what are the cause for elevated JVP? Somebody asked. The causes should be like RV failure, secondary to TR, PR, free PR. Those are the causes which we are supposed to tell. Then coming on to if there is right-sided aortic arch, they can have, which occurs in about 25% of the cases, they will have right sternoclavicular joint pulsation. It is not always seen, only in some cases. More often, right-sided aortic arch can be easily made out in chest X-ray based on indentation on the trachea. Then our TOF patients will usually have right RV type of apical impulse. you're suspecting TOF based on history, but if you're getting LV type of apex, then probably it is a TOF variant rather than, then it is probably a TOF physiology rather than true TOF. Okay, like single ventricle physiology or tricuspid atresia with VSD-PS, those things we have to consider. Then coming on to thrill, there will be usually no thrill if there is severe stenosis. However, if the stenosis is relatively less severe, systolic thrill can be present if there is good amount of pulmonary blood flow. Then second, left intercostal space will be resonant to Percus. However, the exception for this, if there is a dull note, the possibilities are post-stenotic dilatation, post-palliative shunts like BT shunt, or in TOF with absent pulmonary valve, because the pulmonary MPA, RPA, LP are all dilated, you can have dullness on percussion. Then the second sound is usually single, and it will be A2. Iota is displaced anteriorly, hence we'll get a loud A2, and this loud E2 is called as Peacock's loud ringing sound, which is described in Perloff. Peacock's loud ringing sound. Just remember the name. It occurs because of the anteriorly placed dextroposed iota. Then if the tall iota is dilated, then we can have, as in seen in adult TOF, then we can have even aortic ejection click that I mentioned here. Aortic ejection click can be seen in older patients when the aorta is dilated. And if at all they develop AR, then we will have early diastolic murmur. Then early diastolic murmur in the aortic area. Then coming on to other findings, the systolic murmur, this is described as ejection systolic murmur in Moss and Adams, because once I told this ejection systolic murmur, and some of the, I don't remember, somebody opposed. They told it can't be called as ejection systolic murmur because it is subvalvular obstruction. So some of the examiners may not be happy with the word ejection systolic murmur, however, for using it for subvalvular stenosis like HOCM or if TOF, but however, it is mentioned in Perloff, so we can use it. So the systolic murmur or TOF is characteristically located in the left third intercostal space, slightly inferior compared to the expected site of valvular PS. It is a crescendo decrescendo murmur or increase in intensity, crescendo decrescendo murmur, and its intensity and quality depends upon severity of pulmonary stenosis. It will be totally absent in TOF with pulmonary atresia. The duration of the murmur varies inversely depending upon the degree of RVOT obstruction. Coming on to diastolic murmur in children are usually not seen except in the post-operative setting, where they can have diastolic murmur of pulmonary regurgitation if transalveolar patch is used. Occasionally, there may be high-pitched diastolic murmur of aortic regurgitation that is commonly seen in adults. Then in a harsh decrescendo murmur in conjunction with harsh murmur of pulmonary stenosis is seen in TOF with absent pulmonary valve, that is to and fro murmur, or also called as sawing wood murmur, can be seen in the case of TOF with absent pulmonary valve. There can be a continuous murmur in tetralogy of Fallot. Again, this is a commonly asked question. What are the cause of continuous murmur in TOF? The answer should be PDA, where it will be heard over the Gibson's area. Then aortopulmonary Gibson's area is left first intercostal space, little bit away from the sternum. Then coming on to aortopulmonary collaterals, which can produce murmur over the bilateral back, infraclavicular area, parasternal area, and at the axilla. All these areas we are supposed to auscultate for looking for continuous murmurs for collaterals. And functioning BT shunt, so which produces the murmur in the infraclavicular area, provided if it is functioning. So you have to remember that the VSD in tetralogy of Fallot will be large, non-restrictive, with equal pressures in LV and RV, so it does not cause any murmur. Coming on to natural history of TOF, what we classically tell, that natural history was given by Bertuni et al. Study was an autopsy study, retrospective autopsy study conducted in Denmark in 1978. It was conducted. So in this study, it was found 2/3 of the patients reach in a totally unoperated and untreated cases, 2/3 of the children reached their first birthday, 50% reached 3 years, 25% reached the first decade, that is 10 years. Then 11% were survived at 20 years, 6% at 30 years, and 3% at 40 years. Then coming on to, and I already told you the natural history of tricuspid atresia with absent pulmonary valve, which has worse prognosis than this. So 1 year survival is only about 25%. And in TOF with pulmonary atresia, it is still 1 year survival is about 50%, and 10 year survival is about 25%. It's still worse. It is better. It is better than TOF with absent pulmonary valve, but worse than classical TOF. Then coming on to complications of tetralogy of Fallot. So they can have hyperviscosity syndrome, which occur because of secondary erythrocytosis. Hypoxia stimulating the bone marrow for excessive erythropoietin synthesis causes secondary erythropoiesis. Then because of this secondary erythropoiesis, there will be iron deplete erythropoiesis, and these iron deplete erythrocytes are often sticky and predisposes them to thrombosis and other features of hyperviscosity syndrome. Then they can have cerebral stroke and CVT, which commonly occurs because of hyperviscosity. Then cerebral abscess, bleeding tendencies, bacterial endocarditis, heart failure, decreased IQ, especially among those with recurrent cyanotic spells, hyperuricemia and gout can happen. Then these individuals are also at increased risk of pulmonary tuberculosis, 2.5-fold increased risk compared to general population. This is because of higher alveolar oxygen content, higher alveolar oxygen content because of ventilation perfusion mismatch. The alveolar oxygen partial pressure of oxygen to alveoli will be high. Thus, there as a tubercle bacilli is more likely to grow in the blood. Is more likely to that predisposes to pulmonary tuberculosis at the lung. Then coming on to coronary artery disease, the atherosclerotic coronary artery disease, it tend to be lower in the patient with all cyanotic congenital heart disease, including tetralogy of Fallot. This is because these patients will have dilated, tortuous, larger sized hepatic coronary arteries. Then they will have hypocholesterolemia, decreased LDL, decreased platelet count, upregulated nitric oxide synthesis, and hyperbilirubinemia. So hypoxemia in these individuals decreases the oxidized LDL, which in turn is atherogenic. As a result, the TOF patients are at a decreased risk of atherosclerotic coronary artery disease. This is one favorable factor which we should remember in TOF patients. Then here is the pathogenesis of hyperviscosity syndrome, just to describe. So it is hyperviscosity is usually diagnosed if there is more than 65% of hematocrit is more than 65%. A sharp increase in the viscosity of the blood occurs, precipitated by lower oxygen content causing erythropoietin stimulation. This in turn will be further made worse if there is iron deficiency, causing iron deficient erythropoiesis. These will predispose to cortical vein thrombosis, thrombocytopenia, defective platelet aggregation, prolonged BT, EPTT, and abnormality of the clotting factors, predisposing to bleeding and hyperuricemia and gout. So hyperviscosity can result in both bleeding, thrombotic complication, hyperuricemia, and gout. All these can be secondary to hyperviscosity. Coming on to cerebral venous thrombosis, usually occurs in the cerebral veins. So venous thrombosis is more common than arterial thrombosis. This we need to remember. Common in the presence of extreme polycythemia and dehydration. Maintaining adequate hydration is thus very important in all TOF patients. Thrombosis occurs most often in the patients younger than 2 years of age. The patients may have iron deficiency despite of having normal hemoglobin and hematocrit. This is one important thing to remember. That's why it is always better to do iron profile in these patients. Then in the presence of iron deficient erythropoiesis, the RBCs are sticky. They will be less the rheological effect will be lost. That we need to remember. Then coming on to therapy consists of adequate hydration, supportive treatment. Phlebotomy is only indicated if the HP is more than 20, hematocrit is more than 65, and patient is having clearly the symptoms of hyperviscosity with iron with no signs of no evidence of iron deficiency with iron profile. So serum ferritin level should be normal to do phlebotomy. And phlebotomy and volume replacement with fresh frozen plasma may be indicated in extremely polycythemic child. And whenever we do phlebotomy, we have to give adequate amount of IV fluids to replace the amount of blood we have removed. Then coming on to brain abscess. This is common in the age group more than 2 years. Then the onset of the illness is often insidious, and patient will signs of cerebral abscess like headache, nausea, vomiting. Seizures are common. Focal neurological deficits, CT, MRI are used for diagnosis and treated with antibiotics. The main mechanism of cerebral abscess is because of one is because of microinfarct secondary to hyperviscosity, which acts as a nidus for infection. Secondly, because of right to left shunting, the immune system get compromised because the phagocytic function of the pulmonary capillary blood is lost. As a result, bacteria can easily escape from escape the phagocytic function of the lung and infect in the lung, infect in the brain, then cause infection in the brain. Then coming on to bacterial endocarditis may occur in right ventricular infundibulum, or it can affect the pulmonary valve, aortic valve, and rarely the tricuspid valve. Endocarditis may complicate the palliative shunts or corrective surgeries also. Then coming on to heart failure, I told what are the causes of
Arun, they
heart
asked that, sorry to interrupt.
failure.
They asked now why brain abscess is common after 2 years, not below 2 years.
I think initially the maternal antibodies will be there. Then also I think those are the reasons. I think
Till 2 years,
other
I
reason?
think the child will be dependent on mother milk only.
Mother's milk, maternal
After
antibodies.
2 years,
No,
with teeth
mother's milk
development and all.
complementary feeding will be started by 6 months, not 2 years. No, most of them tell that child starts brushing, or at most of the times teeth eruption is
Teeth
more.
eruption is one more cause. I think correct. Teeth eruption. I think somebody has told this correct. Teeth eruption.
And that
Then
vein thrombosis less than 2 years, because she will be totally dependent on mother's milk. She baby will get dehydrated early and they will get that vein thrombosis, cerebral vein thrombosis less than 2 years.
Okay. Then coming on to heart, here we have to remember one point, that is pink fallet. They are commonly asked what is meant by pink fallet. Pink fallet is a cyanotic form of tetralogy of fallet where there will be relatively preserved pulmonary blood flow. What is the cause for preserving? What is the cause for higher saturation in these patients? They will have increased pulmonary blood flow, probably because of relatively less severe pulmonary RVOT stenosis. That's all we can tell.
And Arun, one more question directors are used to ask, no, what is the gradient in my moderate, mild obstruction, top with a mild
No. All cases will have high gradient. That is what the answer he wants.
high gradient, but why is that? What is the physiology behind it? Like mild type of severity, moderate severity, more severe obstruction. Even though it is more severe obstruction, why is the gradient same, not significantly different among them?
As
I
SVR
think
is
the pink turf is mainly because they've got more
collaterals.
something like that.
I also used
It
to
is
think
not
like
the
that.
severity is less. Severity is
No.
always less.
That is not mentioned anywhere.
It's always
Collaterals and all.
severe. The obstruction is always severe in top, but why is the gradient same in like mild severity, moderate severity?
That is what the in various this dasher group discussion and all that was going on. Now what the people they were explaining were, it is like severe the RVOT obstruction will be severe in all cases. However, in that only it will be relatively more mild severe, moderately severe, very severe. Like that the variation happens. It is like a dynamic outflow tract obstruction. So there will be obstruction at multiple levels, both infundibular, valvular, and sometimes supravalvular level. So all these three togetherly will affect the RVOT impedance. Depending upon the RVOT impedance, if at all it is relatively less, then they may have relatively better pulmonary blood flow and they will have less severe cyanosis.
Like what are used to ask, no, like the severity of the loudness of murmur is inversely related to the severity of the degree of the degree of severity. But why is the difference same, not significantly different from in our three groups?
So murmur is determined by amount of pulmonary blood flow, not by, okay. As the pulmonary blood flow increases, the murmur will be of longer duration. When it decreases, it will be of shorter duration, which in turn is indirectly depend upon RVOT impedance or RVOT obstruction. So it is something like dynamic obstruction that is responsible. Overall, we can tell that. Dimpu. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else we can tell for this pink fallet explanation?
No, what you said is correct. That's all. No, what else is there?
And this collaterals and all, whether it is implicated in pink palette. Actually, it can be implicated, but nowhere in the books it is described as that.
No, basically they don't want us to say that the obstruction is less severe in pink phalle. They just want us to tell that the antegrade pulmonary flow is good, whichever means.
Somehow it is maintained because of probably balance
Yeah.
between the pulmonary and systemic.
Yeah. So they have a retained pulmonary antegrade flow through probably good presence of good collaterals is what we can say. But we should not say that the obstruction is mild. That's what Venki was asking.
Can aortopulmonary collaterals be implicated for this thing?
Yeah, they are. No, most of the times, pink phalate is because of a very good antegrade flow because of significant collaterals only.
No,
I
if
check.
VSD is restrictive, then also antegrade flow can be good, no?
Yeah, that's one way. But
that is also
But antegrade flow, that is again, there is a higher chance. If VSD is restrictive, Varshit, they say that there is a higher chance of RV failure rather than a very good antegrade flow. They say RV failure and RV heave can be appreciated in restrictive VSD. They say not antegrade flow or pink fallow, but I guess it can happen because you are not changing the obstruction in them. No, you are not changing the obstruction in the patients with antegrade flow.
No, I feel so. What I feel is because the VSD in classical TOF is non-restrictive, all the flow will definitely be diverted to LV because it has a low resistance compared to the RVT resistance. But once your VSD is also restrictive, the antegrade flow can be augmented and which can result in pink TOF. That's what I used to understand.
That's what. No. VSD restriction mainly causes RV failure and RV heave in TOF setting. Not
that is nowhere described as a cause for pink TOF.
Pink TOF, not pink TOF.
With restriction.
Okay.
Because you are not overcoming the obstruction, no, which is severe.
So mainly because of preserved antegrade flow and this collaterals. Collaterals, I think whether to tell or not, I'm not sure.
Most of the time, this TOF with pulmonary atresia will present with failure, like they'll not have cyanosis.
They may have increased pulmonary blood flow. They may not be so severe.
TOF with pulmonary atresia or absent pulmonary valve?
Absent. Sorry, pulmonary atresia. These patients also sometimes may not have so severe cyanosis. They may present with increased pulmonary blood flow features because the collaterals are too many.
Yeah, that is because of the collaterals. Again, that's what I'm saying. The absence of cyanosis is not because the obstruction is not severe. It's because of the collaterals giving a good.
So that's why while describing the management of TOF with absent pulmonary valve, they describe both. It depends upon whether it is increased pulmonary blood flow or decreased pulmonary blood flow, and again further the.
That's what. So pink fallow. Whenever they ask in exam, if they ask what is the reason for pink fallow, we should not say it's because of milder form of obstruction because there is no milder form of obstruction in though it is described in Perloff like that. They say there is a mild.
Perloff it has given.
Perloff it's there, but they are asking us to refrain saying that discussion has come up again and again. Yeah.
And this one, see, in this case also there is some controversy. I think Prabhavati Madam used to tell that this you told, no, that pulmonary atresia with collaterals can present with failure. So that even in Kamal it is written that if you have any acquired shunt, like if you have done a BT shunt, then the chance of failure is more, but the naturally occurring collaterals will never lead to failure. It will be in proportion to the demand of the patient. So that is also one point which is written in Kamal Sharma, and Prabhavati Madam also used to tell that the presentation of TOF pulmonary atresia due to failure as a failure due to collaterals is controversial. Some agree, some don't agree.
No, Varshit, LV failure we are talking about, not RV failure actually, or pulmonary edema.
I'm talking of LV failure only. I'm talking of LV only. That
in LV, insignificant, BT shunt won't be an LV failure, no? BT shunt will be pulmonary flooding actually.
Right now, when you say restrict this TOF, I think both ventricles will be, they are similar only, no? Large VSD. So the failure, the presentation as a failure, it is more likely with like with BT shunt. If you do post BT shunt, there can be this pulmonary, this one, what you call hypercirculation, which is likely with that, but not with the collaterals. That's what is written in Kamal Sharma. That's what it is there.
Okay, now madam will take off class note. That time we'll discuss with ma'am.
Okay.
Then coming on to ECG changes. ECG changes, P waves may be usually in pediatric population, P waves will be normal. It can be peaked in adult TOF. One minute. So P wave duration may be short because the left atrium is underfilled and relatively small. The PR interval is usually normal unless there is conduction system abnormality, which commonly occurs in the post-TOF patients. The QRS axis, there will be right axis deviation. The important point to remember is that sudden transition from V1 to V2. I think that I've written next, I'll tell that. The QRS axis will be usually there will be a right axis deviation. If there is left axis deviation, suspect TOF with AV canal defect or common ventricle with pulmonary stenosis or tricuspid atresia with VSD EPS. These are the things to be remembered. In pre-op patients, TOF QRS duration will be usually normal. Post-op, always it will be wide. Right ventricular hypertrophy is characterized by tall monomorphic R wave in V1 with abrupt transition to RS pattern in V2. The probable reason is because of the window effect of the VSD. So as a result, the lead V2 will pick up the RV forces. V1 will be picking the RV forces and giving the tall R wave. V2 will be picking the LV forces and giving the small r and DPS pattern. So this is a ECG. Here we can see the prominent R wave in V1 and sudden transition in V2 and the right axis deviation. So all these are the important features. Coming on to X-ray, there will be decreased pulmonary vascularity. In TOF with pulmonary atresia, systemic artery collaterals and bronchial arteries may result in normal vascularity. Not in all cases, it may result in. Usually this is also decreased pulmonary blood flow only. Then the size of the heart is usually normal, except sometimes there can be cardiomegaly. If cardiomegaly is there, the causes are AR, post-operative PR, TOF with absent pulmonary valve, hypertension, infected endocarditis, large MAPCAS, and anemia. The configuration of the heart has to be described as boot-shaped or Corin Sabut, and this Corin Sabut results from two things. One is because of hypertrophied RV, prominent pulmonary bay, and Kamal Sharma also mentions it is because of underfilled LV. And underfilled, so concentric LV, RV hypertrophy, prominent pulmonary bay because MPA is small, and underfilled LV contributes to boot-shaped heart. Then coming on to right aortic arch seen in about 25 to 30% of the patients. This can be made out by looking for the indentation on the trachea. If there is indentation on the right side of the trachea, then it is right arch. If it is on the left side, then it is left arch. And whenever there is right-sided aortic arch, the usual aortic knuckle which we see on the left side will also be lost. So this is the classical X-ray of tetralogy of Fallot. The boot-shaped heart, prominent pulmonary bay, no cardiomegaly, decreased pulmonary blood flow. Then coming on to echocardiographic features.
Arun, it's almost 11. You want to continue or
no?
How much you
as
have
you
left?
wish. Oh, 1 minute.
How much is left?
38. So I think half completed or lesser than half.
Okay. Yeah, almost.
So echo, shall we finish off echo and stop?
Yeah. We'll finish echo today. The rest we will start tomorrow.
Another 1, 2.
Okay.
I think I'll finish these 3 pages. Okay.
Okay.
There it goes. So echo, most of the things are repetitions. That is aorta overriding, then ventricular septal defect we have to see. Most of the time it is, as I told, perimembranous or subaortic VSD with outlet extensions, 75%. the AV septal defect can be seen in 2%, and doubly committed subarterial VSD can be seen in 5% of the patients. Then RVOT anatomy, infundibulار valvular supravalvular stenosis, we should look for. Then pulmonary artery confluence and the size of the pulmonary arteries should be assessed. Assess the aortopulmonary laterals, which can be possible in few cases and not in all. But however, echo is not the modality for assessing the aortopulmonary collaterals. Then we have to look for PDA, then aortic arch, additional muscular VSD, which can be often missed in transthoracic echo. Look for presence of LSPC. Then post-operative, pre-op post-operatively we assess these parameters, and also pre-operatively one more thing to be looked is whether coronary artery is crossing RVOT. Post-op patients, we have to look for residual VSD, residual pulmonary stenosis or the infundibular stenosis, then pulmonary regurgitation, then branch PA stenosis, patency of BT shunt, then tricuspid regurgitation, aortic regurgitation, and RV function and size should be assessed. Then this is the image showing TOF with the classical gradient across the RVOT, seen in parasternal short axis view. Then here we can see the size of the parasternal short axis view showing the pulmonary artery, and there is this is the MPA, LPA, and RPA. Using this, you can assess, you can calculate the Z score and then assess whether it is suitable for corrective repair or whether it should be considered for palliative surgery. This is the image showing this coronary arteries crossing the RVOT. Actually, this is the right. This is the image showing LAD crossing the RVOT. Okay, and here is a single coronary artery coming like right coronary artery originating from left coronary artery. LAD, left anterior descending artery, LAD originating from RCA and crossing RVOT. This is one thing. And second one, this image is the one which is showing single coronary artery originating from left sinus and going like this, the single coronary artery. Then coming on to cardiac CT, it is mainly useful for assessing the anatomy of the coronary arteries, pulmonary arteries, systemic venous return. If there is aortopulmonary collaterals, that can be assessed. However, this multiple muscular VSD can be missed in this. So most of the times, whatever the information is needed can be got with cardiac CT and echo itself. So cardiac catheterization is rarely performed. Cardiac MRI, MRI is mainly useful in post-op repair patients to assess RV function, regurgitant fraction, and to consider them for pulmonary valve replacement, or if they have tricuspid valve replacement. If they have a tricuspid regurgitation and RV failure, in such cases to assess the RV function and the regurgitant fraction, it is useful. It is useful for the selection of the patients for pulmonary valve replacement. So this is the MRI images, and they give good anatomy. They give good images about the pulmonary artery, main pulmonary artery, RPA, LPA, the confluence, collaterals, and RV size, regurgitant fraction, regurgitant volume, all this. Then coming on to cardiac catheterization, the classically asked what are the purpose of cardiac catheterization in TOF. So we have to tell it is for delineating the pulmonary artery anatomy, both central and peripheral pulmonary arteries, to delineate MAPCAS and their coil closure as a therapeutic. This is a therapeutic indication to delineate the coronary artery anatomy and to identify additional muscular VSD. This is the one which can be missed in CT, echo, and MRI, and can be only delineated by using cardiac catheterization. Pulmonary vein wedge angiogram, which is rarely done nowadays because of availability of CT, MRI, is indicated in patients with TOF with pulmonary atresia when central pulmonary arteries are not delineated, even after imaging and aortogram. If we are not able to see the central pulmonary artery and not able to get a better anatomy, then we may have to consider for this pulmonary vein wedge angiogram, which is rarely done nowadays. The degree of subpulmonic obstruction and deviation of the outlet septum is also is well profiled in RAO view. VSD can be better profiled in long axial oblique orientation. Then RAO view is used for assessing the RVOT anatomy. LAO is used for assessing aorta overriding. Then pulmonary artery can be visualized better with RV injection. And whenever there are MAPCAS, we have to selective angiogram of the MAPCAS has to be done, and their supply of the blood has to be, and their fitness has to be assessed. Then coming on to various indices that are used, McGunn's ratio, that is the diameter of RPA plus LPA divided by descending aorta taken at the level of diaphragm. Why it is taken at the level of diaphragm? The ascending aorta may be dilated as a part of TOF, as it is known to as it is usually known to happen in about 7% of the adult of. Then the normal ratio is 2:2.1. If it is said to be adequate for repair if it is more than 1.5, and it is considered as inadequate if it is less than 0.8. Coming on to Nakata index, that is cross-sectional area of the RPA and cross-sectional area of LPA divided by body surface area. Normal value is more than 200. If it is less than 100 mm square per meter square, then it is then it is considered as adequate. If it is more than 100, it is adequate. Then coming on to one more indices called as total.
Is it more than 100 or more than 150?
That various books gives one more various values. I think one in Kamal, in some books they are given 100, some give 150. I think 150 is better, no? I'll write it 150. Then total neopulmonary artery index, aortopulmonary. This is APC index plus Nakata index, that is aortopulmonary collateral index, which is calculated by taking the sum of cross-sectional area of all the usable aortopulmonary collaterals and the body surface area. If it is more than 250, then it is considered to be suitable for repair. And another which is commonly used is Z score. Based on the Z score of -2 to 2 is considered as normal. Okay, that's it. Tomorrow we'll discuss about treatment.
Yeah. Arun. ಮತ್ತೆ ಇದು ದಟ್ ಟಾಪ್ RVOT murmur. Clinically how to describe ಅಂದ್ರೆ should we say that it is a late picking murmur ಹಂಗೇನ
ಅದು ಹೇಳ್ಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ನಾಗಮಣಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಲೇಟ್ ಪಿಕಿಂಗ್ is not given in Perloff also, not given in Moss and Adams also. I think better not to tell late picking. You can just tell it as a crescendo, decrescendo. Ejection systolic murmur you can use. Prabhavati madam, ejection word you can use, but crescendo, decrescendo, where it is speaking, I think it is better not to tell, because that is mainly for valvular PS, I think.
Okay.
Valvular PS or valvular AS. Yes. Even in HOCM, we are not supposed to tell late picking and all those things.
No, actually, the ejection terminology. Hello. Yeah, ejection terminology in Hutchison is basically given. It's for saying valvular. That it is for semilunar valves and for the root. So you can use it for supravalvular AS or supravalvular PS or valvular AS bar PS. But it is
Rangaraj sir and Ashalata madam, when I presented one case, they told no, you can't call it as ejection. It is I present the HOCM case.
The reason why it should not be said is because it is given in Hutchison that that the word is generally used for semilunar valves and for the root. You should not use it for the subvalvular. That is
so
why
better to just tell it as a crescendo, decrescendo, mid-systolic murmur.
Yeah, at least that is what was the classic teaching in CMC also, that you cannot use ejection for subvalvular, because if you have a subaortic membrane, you say mid-systolic rather than ejection systolic. That's given.
And peaking also cannot be described, no?
Yeah, generally peaking is mid-systolic. If you say mid-systolic, if it is usually loudest in the mid of the system.
Mid only, but
yeah.
You can just tell it as a mid-systolic.
Because ejection systolic can have a later peaking, probably. And that is why, which is what is most commonly seen in valvular. I mean, in severe valvular aortic stenosis, you can't say, it's not, what they mean is, not all not all ejection systolic or mid-systolic. Ejection systolic can also be late peaking. And they can go on become a kite shaped as in pulmonary stenosis, no? So at least they used to say that ejection systolic murmurs are from semilunar valves and or the root. You don't use it for subvalvular structures generally. I think that's why some people are saying that, and some people are saying because it occurs with LV ejection you can use it. I'm not sure, but this is what I mean. This is what is given in the book. Hutchison says that. Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow.
Thanks, Arun. It was comprehensive. I think we'll wait for the second part also. And tomorrow you're going to talk only about
management, medical land. Tomorrow only. What time will you have?
You decide the time if you're okay. Decide the time.
Tomorrow any time is okay. I think we'll discuss in the group.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Aruna.
Thanks, Arun.
Thank you.
Thank you.